So today I wanted to share with you how I prepped a whole bunch of sourdough recipes in one day and then throughout the week just took them out and baked them whenever I had the time. That's one of the things that I love about sourdough is that it rises really slowly and you can just put it in the fridge and just keep it in there until you have time to bake it or use it or roll it out or whatever you're doing with it. That way you can kind of spread things out throughout the week, so you can prep the dough like in one day, but you don't have to bake everything or roll everything out or do everything in one day. You can maybe bake one that day and then the rest of it just keep it in the fridge if you have the room, obviously, and then throughout the week you can just use it when you need it. So I started off making some sourdough donuts because it's almost Easter and I wanted to make these mini egg donuts with my nephews and my daughter and have fun just decorating them. So I am warming up 1 1/4 cups of milk with a 1/2 cup of sugar and a 1/4 cup of butter. I will link the written recipe down in the description below. It is from Farmhouse on Boone, so I didn't make it up. You're just doing this to melt the butter. So once the butter is all melted, put it in my stand mixer bowl and added some flour, about 2 cups, which is half of what you're gonna need. And that's just so that when you put your 1 cup of sourdough starter in, you're not putting it into a really hot liquid. And then after the sourdough starter, I added 1 teaspoon of salt and then the rest of the flour and 2 eggs. And then using a dough hook, you want to just mix that until it gets nice and smooth and elasticy, which might take about like 15 minutes. And while that was mixing, I started my normal sourdough loaf, which I always do a double batch, which I will link if you want the recipe. Now, you might have noticed that I didn't put any starter in here, and I did not notice that. So later on in the video, I will explain how I fixed that and how I salvaged it and how it actually turned out pretty cool, so stay tuned for that because I actually made something really cool. So after the donut dough was done, I put it in a separate bowl, covered it, put it in the oven with the light on to let it rise for 5 to 6 hours, and then put it in the fridge overnight. So I forgot that I wanted to make some sourdough buns as well, so I didn't take any eggs out to come to room temperature, so I'm just putting them under some hot water to warm them up. While I was waiting, I melted 1/2 cup of butter and added 6 tablespoons of honey to it just to soften the honey a little bit. Poured that into the same bowl that I used for the donuts, since it's pretty much the same ingredients anyway, and then just added the rest of the ingredients. So I added 6 cups of flour to that, 1 cup of sourdough starter, 2 teaspoons of salt, 1 1/2 cups of warm water, and the 2 eggs that were now at room temperature. So this dough is pretty much the same as the donut dough. You want to use a dough hook, mix it up until it gets nice and elastic. And since I want to just show you how I did everything in one day, while that was mixing, I was doing my stretch and folds every 15 minutes and then every 30 minutes, even though it was completely pointless. But I didn't know that at the time. And then when the bun dough was ready, I covered that up and let it sit for 8 hours before putting it in the fridge. So that was day 1 of prepping all of these recipes. I did it all in one day. I have the donut dough, the bun dough, and the sourdough bread dough. And after letting them rise for the appropriate amount of time for each one, I put them all in the fridge overnight. The next morning, I took out my bread that's supposed to be my sourdough bread, and I just rolled them into 2 separate balls like I always do. I covered them and put them aside and then started on my donuts. So I did it a little bit differently than what the recipe says and what I would normally do. Usually I would roll it out flat and then cut them out, but I got the idea to just roll them into a ball and flatten them into donut shapes from someone that I follow on Instagram, and it was honestly so much easier. I also had a little helper helping me make these donuts, so that was really nice. I was thinking of just frying the donuts the way that they were, but I'm used to them having holes in the middle, so I figured I would do that, and then I could make some Timbits for my daughter, and she had a lot of fun helping me as well.
I know you.
Thank you. So I covered the donuts with a towel and put them in the oven with a light on to let them rise, and I think they rose for about 2.5 to 3 hours. I think they could have done with a little less time, but it still worked out. So I took some oil, just put it in my cast iron skillet, and once it was hot, I fried the donuts. It takes about 10 seconds per side. I like to flip them with forks, and that's maybe just because that's how my mom taught me to do it, but I think it just works out the best. After the donuts cooled down, I put them in a container and just froze them, and they were in the freezer for about 2 days, and I brought them to my parents' house. My sister came over with her kids, and we all decorated donuts together, and it was just really fun. So I made some homemade vanilla frosting for the donuts, and then I just crushed up some mini eggs and put them all over, and they were really good. So I totally forgot to put the starter in my normal bread loaf dough, and I did everything. I did all the stretch and folds and everything, and I was wondering why it wasn't rising. Like, I thought I could see bubbles forming, so I'm like, there's no way that I didn't put starter in there. And I'm like trying to think of it, but I guess I didn't. I look back at the footage that I had, I didn't put starter in there, so now I just have 2 balls of dough that didn't rise at all. So, and they already are forming like a crust on top because they were exposed to air a little bit because I just covered it with a towel. So I have to take all of that off, and then I'm going to try mixing them all together again and then putting the starter in, and I'm just hoping it's gonna turn out okay. I guess we'll see what happens. First time for everything, right? After adding the starter, I did the whole process over again with all the stretch and folds, and then putting it in the fridge overnight, and then rolling them into their own separate balls and letting them rise. Today is now 4 days from when we made all this dough, and the sourdough bun dough has been in the fridge the whole time, and we are now just taking it out, rolling them into their own balls, and making buns. I let the buns rise for 2 hours and then put an egg wash on and bake them for about 25 minutes at 350 degrees. Alright, so I let the sourdough bread dough sit overnight in the fridge, took it out. It did rise, but not a lot. So since I had 2 loaves, I baked 1, and it did not turn out. It didn't rise as much as I wanted to. It was really flat. So then the second one, I wanted to do something different because I knew it wasn't going to turn out anyway. So instead of just baking it like a loaf, I spread it out into like a thin piece of dough, I guess, and then kind of was like, I'm just gonna make breadsticks, I guess. So I didn't roll it out, I just kind of like spread it out with my fingers because it was really soft. And I just put some oil on there, just kind of like pressed it in there, kind of like you would a focaccia, but it wasn't like a focaccia because there's no oil in the dough. And then I just put seasonings on it. So I put salt, oregano, dried basil, I think maybe some garlic powder, and onion salt, and it turned out really good. It was chewy, but it was, I don't know, it was so good, and I feel like now I want to just do that for now. I want to try to recreate it, but I don't know exactly how. I'm gonna experiment with it because it is so good. But yeah, sometimes things just don't turn out the way that you want, but I feel like with sourdough, it can easily be changed into something else, and just, you know, be creative with things. And I hope you guys try these recipes out, and I hope that this video kind of gave you motivation and encouragement to try all of these things and to just, you know, be positive even when something messes up and just keep on going. So I hope you guys have a great week.